Karen spent Thursday and Friday crafting what she considered a masterpiece of legal and logical argumentation. If her neighbors wanted a fight, she'd give them one backed by parliamentary procedure, covenant interpretation, and righteous indignation. Saturday evening, she arrived at the community center dressed in her most authoritative outfit, a navy blue blazer, pearls, and her lucky courtroom heels from her brief stint as a paralegal 15 years ago. She carried a leather briefcase containing printed copies of every relevant HOA document, legal precedent she'd found online, and a PowerPoint presentation titled Maintaining Community Standards, a Presidential Duty. The community center was packed. Karen had never seen so many neighbors in one place. Even the Kowalskis from the corner house were there, and they never attended anything. The energy in the room felt like a town hall before a revolution. Tom Jenkins stood at the front, having been elected as temporary meeting facilitator. Let's call this emergency meeting to order. Karen, you have 30 minutes to address the concerns raised in our petition. Karen walked to the front with her head held high, connected her laptop to the projector, and launched into her prepared speech. Fellow residents, she began. What we're witnessing tonight is a fundamental misunderstanding of HOA governance and property value protection. The room was dead silent. As your elected president, I took an oath to preserve and protect our community standards. Every action I've taken has been in service of maintaining the property values that protect your most significant investment, your homes. She clicked to her first slide, violation statistics and property value correlation. Beverly Henderson's wind chime, while sentimental, creates a precedent for unlimited decorative additions. If we allow one oversized wind chime, what's to stop someone from installing a 6-foot garden gnome, or purple flamingos? Or, a wind chime my granddaughter made isn't a 6-foot gnome. Beverly interrupted. Mrs. Henderson, please hold questions until the end, Karen replied smoothly. The point is precedent. Similarly, Tom Jenkins' grass height violation might seem minor, but consistent lawn maintenance is fundamental to curb appeal. She clicked through slides showing property values in HOAs with strict enforcement versus lenient policies, most of which she'd pulled from random real estate websites. As for my measurement activities, thorough documentation is essential for consistent enforcement. How else can we ensure violations are legitimate? By not climbing over my fence at 7 a.m. to measure my bird feeder, shouted Mike Torino. The room erupted in murmurs and scattered applause. Karen's confidence began to waver, but she pushed forward. Regarding the 911 call about Tom's pool removal, I believe there was a genuine covenant violation. When I realized the paperwork had been properly filed, You didn't immediately anything. Tom stood up. You argued with the police officers for 10 minutes about your authority while they tried to explain that HOA drama isn't a police matter. More applause, louder this time. Karen clicked to her final slide. Moving forward, a stronger community. But the projector had somehow switched to a YouTube video of her argument with the police officers, complete with auto-generated captions that read Karen demands pool justice. The room exploded in laughter. That's not. How did? Karen frantically clicked buttons, but the video kept playing. Someone had clearly hacked her presentation. I think we've heard enough, Tom announced over the chaos. All in favor of removing Karen Whitmore as HOA president. Hands shot up across the room like flowers blooming in fast forward. Karen counted them, her heart sinking with each raised hand. 29 in favor, 3 abstentions, and 5 who hadn't attended. Motion carries, Tom announced. Karen, we'll need you to turn over all HOA materials and accounts by Monday. Monday morning brought a knock at Karen's door that she wasn't expecting. Janet Morrison from the City Planning Department stood on her porch with a clipboard and an expression that suggested this wasn't a social call. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to follow up on those complaints about HOA enforcement practices in your neighborhood. Karen invited her in, suddenly grateful that Linda had made her clean up the violation notice disaster zone that had been her kitchen table. I've reviewed the situation, Janet continued, settling into a chair, and there are some legal issues we need to discuss. Several of your violation notices cited city ordinances incorrectly. You also issued fines for things that aren't actually covered by your HOA covenants. Karen's stomach dropped. What do you mean? For instance, you fined the Torinos for their mailbox height, but that's regulated by postal service requirements, not HOA rules. You also cited several residents for unauthorized landscaping when their plants were within both city and HOA guidelines. I was trying to maintain standards. Mrs. Whitmore, you issued legally invalid fines totaling over $800 to your neighbors. The city attorney's office is concerned about potential harassment charges if residents decide to pursue legal action. The room started spinning. Legal action. The good news is that most residents seem willing to let this go now that you're no longer in the HOA leadership role. But you'll need to formally retract all the invalid violation notices and refund any fines that were paid. After Janet left, Karen spent the afternoon researching HOA law and realizing just how badly she'd misunderstood her authority. She'd based most of her enforcement actions on random internet articles and her own interpretation of covenant language that was, at best, ambiguous. By evening, she'd drafted formal retraction letters for every violation notice she'd issued. The process was humbling and mortifying. Each letter forced her to confront another instance where she'd overstepped her bounds or misunderstood the rules she'd been so zealously enforcing. Tuesday brought another surprise, a call from Channel 7 News. Mrs. Whitmore, this is Jessica Chang from Channel 7. We'd like to interview you about the HOA situation in your neighborhood. It's become quite the social media sensation. Social media sensation. The video of your confrontation with police officers has over 50,000 views. We're doing a segment on HOA overreach, and your situation is a perfect example. Karen politely declined the interview, but spent the next hour going down a rabbit hole of social media posts about her neighborhood drama. The story had spread far beyond Willowbrook Estates. She found her situation discussed on Reddit, TikTok, and even a podcast called HOA Horror Stories. One Reddit comment particularly stung. This is exactly why HOAs are toxic. One person gets a tiny bit of power and turns into a dictator. Feel bad for her neighbors. Another, the measuring tape thing is next level crazy. Imagine having nothing better to do than measure your neighbor's wind chimes. But buried in the criticism, she found a few comments that gave her pause. Honestly, she probably started with good intentions. HOA president is usually a thankless job that nobody wants. My HOA president did something similar. I think the stress of trying to keep everyone happy while enforcing rules just breaks some people. She clearly went way too far, but I kind of understand wanting your neighborhood to look nice. She just completely lost perspective. Karen closed her laptop and walked to her window. Across the street, Beverly Henderson was watering her flowers, the controversial wind chime creating gentle music in the afternoon breeze. 2 houses down, Mike Torino's bird feeder was surrounded by cardinals and blue jays. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had before her enforcement campaign. The difference was in how she saw it. Instead of violations and non-compliance, she saw people living their lives in small, harmless ways that brought them joy. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the news story. Going through similar situation with my HOA president. Any advice on dealing with someone like you were? Karen stared at the message for a long time before responding. Tell them that being right about rules doesn't matter if you're wrong about people. Sunday morning, Karen sat in her kitchen staring at a cardboard box filled with HOA files, her presidential nameplate, and the official HOA stamp she'd purchased with her own money. The house felt eerily quiet. No measuring tape clicking, no violation notices to write, no neighborhood patrols to conduct. Her phone had been buzzing all morning with texts and calls, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. The YouTube video from last night's meeting had somehow made its way to the neighborhood Facebook group, along with dozens of comments ranging from "this was inevitable" to "I actually feel bad for her." The doorbell rang at 11:30 am. Through the peephole, she saw her sister Linda holding a bag from their favorite bakery. "I brought stress-eating supplies," Linda announced when Karen opened the door. chocolate croissants, and those little lemon tarts you love. They sat at Karen's kitchen table, picking at pastries in uncomfortable silence. So, Linda finally said, "Want to talk about what happened?" "I was trying to protect property values," Karen mumbled into her coffee. "I was doing my job." "Your job was to manage the HOA, not become the neighborhood enforcement police." But people weren't following the rules. Tom didn't properly describe his pool removal. Beverly's wind chime was too big. Mike's bird feeder. "Karen." Linda's voice was gentle but firm. "Listen to yourself. You're talking about a grandmother's wind chime and a bird feeder like they're major crimes." Karen felt tears threatening. "Everyone thinks I'm some kind of monster. Did you see the Facebook comments? They're calling me HOA Hitler and neighborhood Nazi." "Because you acted like one," Linda said quietly. "Measuring people's roses? Climbing over fences to inspect bird feeders? Calling 911 about a pool removal? I was being thorough. You were being obsessive. There's a difference." Karen wiped her eyes with a napkin. "I just wanted to do a good job. When they elected me president, I thought it meant something. I thought people respected me. They did respect you. Past tense. Until you started treating them like criminals for living their lives." The truth of it hit Karen like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on being the perfect HOA president that she'd forgotten about being a decent neighbor. The measuring tape, the violation notices, the confrontations. None of it had been about community standards. It had been about feeling important, feeling powerful, feeling like she mattered. "I need to fix this," she whispered. "Do you? Or do you need to accept that you broke it and learn from the experience?" Karen looked out her kitchen window toward Tom's house, where his grandchildren were playing in the space where his pool used to be. They were laughing and kicking a soccer ball, completely oblivious to the neighborhood drama that had swirled around that innocent play area. "I think," she said slowly, "I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to control everything around me." Linda squeezed her hand. "That's probably the wisest thing you've said in months." That afternoon, Karen walked through the neighborhood without her measuring tape, without her violation notice pad, without her camera. Just walked, like a normal person taking a normal Sunday stroll. Several neighbors she passed gave her awkward waves or polite nods. No one stopped to chat. But it was a start. By Wednesday evening, Karen had issued 14 violation notices across the neighborhood. Her systematic campaign had targeted everything from slightly off-white mailbox posts to unauthorized bird feeders. The Willowbrook Estates Facebook group had exploded with posts from bewildered residents sharing photos of their citations. "She measured my roses," posted Jennifer Walsh. "Apparently they're growing 6 inches beyond the approved landscaping boundary." "She left a violation notice because my dog's water bowl is visible from the street," added Mike Torino. "It's STINLESSSTO. How is that not aesthetically pleasing?" Karen scrolled through the comments from her kitchen table, feeling a mixture of vindication and growing unease. The laughter had stopped, replaced by genuine anger and confusion. Some residents were talking about calling an emergency HOA meeting. Others mentioned contacting lawyers. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed City Hall. "Mrs. Whitmore? This is Janet Morrison from the City Planning Department. We've received several complaints about aggressive HOA enforcement in your neighborhood. I need to discuss some concerns with you." Karen's stomach dropped. "What kind of concerns?" "Well, for starters, HOAs can't find residents for city-compliant structures. Mailbox heights are regulated by Postal Service requirements, not HOA covenants. Also, we've had 3 calls about someone harassing residents while trespassing on private property to take measurements." "I wasn't trespassing. I was conducting compliance inspections." "Ma'am, HOA board members don't have legal authority to enter private property without permission. You could be charged with trespassing if residents file complaints." The call ended with Janet promising to look into the situation further. Karen sat in her kitchen, staring at her violation notice templates, suddenly wondering if she'd overplayed her hand. Her doorbell rang at 6:47 p.m. Through the peephole, she saw Tom Jenkins, Beverly Henderson, and 6 other neighbors standing on her front porch. Tom was holding a manila folder that looked suspiciously official. Karen, Tom called through the door, we need to talk. She opened the door with as much dignity as she could muster. If this is about the violation notices, I'm simply enforcing community standards. No. Beverly interrupted. This is about calling an emergency meeting to vote you out as HOA president. Karen's blood turned to ice water. You can't do that. Tom opened his folder. According to the HOA bylaws, any 5 residents can petition for a special meeting to address presidential misconduct or abuse of authority. We have signatures from 23 households. 23 households. Karen's voice cracked. Turns out measuring people's wind chimes and flower gardens doesn't make you popular, said Jennifer Walsh, stepping forward from the group. Also, calling 911 for a pool removal? That was the last straw for most people. And threatening to fine Mrs. Henderson for her granddaughter's art project, added Mike Torino. That's when this went from annoying to cruel. Karen looked at the faces surrounding her, neighbors she'd lived near for 8 years, people she'd invited to block parties and holiday gatherings. The anger in their expressions was unmistakable. The meeting is scheduled for this Saturday at 7 p.m. in the community center, Tom continued. You'll have a chance to explain your actions and defend your position as president. After they left, Karen collapsed onto her couch, still holding the petition. 23 signatures. In a neighborhood of 37 houses, that was a clear majority. She'd gone from respected neighbor to community pariah in less than a week. 3 weeks after her removal as HOA president, Karen found herself in an unexpected position, sitting in her car outside the community center, trying to work up the courage to attend the monthly HOA meeting as an ordinary resident. Tom Jenkins had been elected as interim president, and by all accounts, he was taking a dramatically different approach to neighborhood governance. The Facebook group had returned to posts about lost cats and garage sale announcements instead of violation notice documentation. Karen finally walked into the meeting 10 minutes late, sliding into a back row seat while Tom discussed the budget for new streetlight maintenance. Any other business? Tom asked as the meeting wound down. Karen surprised herself by raising her hand. I'd like to say something. A hush fell over the room. 26 neighbors turned to look at her, expressions ranging from curious to wary. I want to apologize, she began, her voice shakier than she'd expected. Not just for the enforcement issues, but for losing sight of what this community actually means. She took a breath, looking around at faces she'd known for years. People she'd shared holidays with, whose children she'd watched grow up, whose struggles and celebrations she'd been part of before everything went wrong. I got so focused on rules and property values that I forgot we're supposed to be neighbors first, she continued. Beverly, your granddaughter's wind chime is beautiful, and I'm sorry I made something special into a problem. Mike, your bird feeder brings joy to the whole block. Tom, your grandkids playing in that backyard space is exactly what neighborhoods should look like. The room remained silent, but Karen noticed some of the tension in people's faces beginning to soften. I've retracted all the violation notices and refunded the fines that were paid. I also want you to know that I've learned something important about the difference between being a leader and being a dictator. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I won't be running for any HOA positions in the future, but I hope I can earn back your trust as a neighbor, even if it takes time. After the meeting, Beverly Henderson approached her in the parking lot. Karen, that took courage, she said. Apologies are rare these days. I owe everyone much more than an apology, Karen replied. I caused real stress and hurt feelings. Yes, you did, but acknowledging that is the first step toward making it right. Over the following months, Karen slowly rebuilt her place in the neighborhood ecosystem. She helped organize the annual block party, contributed to the community garden project, and even volunteered to maintain the little free library at the entrance to their subdivision. She never again carried a measuring tape during neighborhood walks. The YouTube video of her police confrontation eventually faded from social media prominence, though it still got occasional views. Karen learned to live with the embarrassment, considering it a permanent reminder of what happens when good intentions get twisted by ego and misplaced authority. Tom's pool area transformed into a beautiful garden where his grandchildren built fairy houses and learned to identify different butterflies. The space became a neighborhood gathering spot, with kids and adults alike drawn to its peaceful energy. Karen often walked past the garden during her evening strolls, reflecting on how different things might have been if she'd approached that original pool removal with curiosity instead of control, with collaboration instead of confrontation. "Ma'am," Officer Thompson said, barely containing his laughter, "you called 911 because your neighbor didn't get HOA approval to remove his own pool." Karen's chest puffed up like an indignant peacock. "Officer, you clearly don't understand the legal ramifications of covenant violations. I have the authority to." "Actually," Tom interrupted, pulling out another document, "I do have HOA approval." He handed Karen a letter bearing her own signature. "You approved it yourself 3 weeks ago." The color drained from Karen's face as she stared at the document. She remembered now. She'd been rushing through paperwork during her mani-pedi appointment, barely reading the submissions. The request had been filed as backyard landscaping improvements, which technically wasn't wrong. This is DCET type," she sputtered. "You deliberately missiled me with vague terminology." Officer Martinez shook his head. "Ma'am, calling 911 for HOA disputes is a misuse of emergency services. We respond to life-threatening situations, not neighborhood disagreements. But this is life-threatening to property values." Both officers exchanged another look, and Thompson actually snorted. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to resolve this through proper HOA channels. Have a good day, Mr. Jenkins." As the cruisers pulled away, Karen stood in Tom's driveway, clutching her binder like a shield against reality. The excavator continued its work, each scoop of dirt feeling like a personal attack on her authority. Neighbors had started gathering on porches and sidewalks, drawn by the commotion like spectators at a particularly entertaining accident. "This isn't over," she announced to no one in particular, then spun on her heel and marched back to her house. Inside her pristine kitchen, Karen spread the HOA covenants across her granite countertop like a general planning a siege. If Tom thought he could embarrass her in front of the entire neighborhood, he had another thing coming. She'd been president of this HOA for exactly 43 days, and she'd be damned if some pool-removing rebel would undermine her authority. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Heard about your 911 call from 3 different people already. Facebook is going crazy. Maybe tone it down." Karen's jaw tightened. Facebook. Of course someone had posted about it. Probably that gossipy Linda Chen from Maple Street, who always had her phone out documenting every neighborhood drama. She opened her laptop and navigated to the Willowbrook Estates Facebook group. Sure enough, Linda had posted a video of Karen arguing with the police officers, complete with crying laughing emojis and the caption, "When keeping up with the Joneses goes too far. #OurLife Karen gonna Karen." The video had 37 likes and counting. Karen's hands shook as she scrolled through the comments. Her neighbors, people she'd considered friends, were laughing at her, making jokes about her emergency and her authority. Someone had even created a meme using her image. "We'll see who's laughing," she muttered, slamming the laptop shut. "We'll see who's laughing when I find every single one of them for covenant violations." Karen Whitmore's perfectly manicured fingers trembled as she clutched her rhinestone-encrusted phone, watching in absolute horror as her neighbor Tom Jenkins directed the excavator toward what used to be his backyard pool. The machine's diesel engine roared like some prehistoric beast, drowning out her shriek of, "This is a disaster. 911, what's your emergency?" Came the calm voice through her phone. "There's been a catastrophic violation of our HOA regulations." Karen gasped, pressing her face against her kitchen window, so hard that her nose left a smudge on the glass. "My neighbor is destroying community property values with heavy machinery. Send someone immediately." The dispatcher paused. "Ma'am, is anyone injured or in immediate danger?" "Yes, the entire neighborhood's aesthetic integrity is under assault. 3 houses down." Tom Jenkins wiped sweat from his brow as the excavator operator carefully maneuvered around the pool's deep end. After 18 months of fighting a losing battle against algae, broken pumps, and skyrocketing maintenance costs, he'd finally decided to fill in the 30-year-old concrete eyesore. His wife Linda had been thrilled, more yard space for their grandkids to play safely. Karen, however, had been monitoring the situation with the intensity of a military strategist. As the newly elected president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, she'd made it her personal mission to preserve what she called the community's refined standards. The fact that Tom hadn't submitted proper paperwork for his pool removal was, in her mind, tantamount to architectural terrorism. "This is completely illegal," she announced to her reflection in the window, practicing the speech she'd deliver to the responding officers. Section 4.27 of our HOA covenant clearly states that any structural modifications require written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. The irony that she constituted the entire Architectural Review Committee seemed lost on her. 20 minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled up to Tom's driveway. Officers Martinez and Thompson exchanged glances as they watched Karen charging across 3 lawns in her velour tracksuit and fuzzy slippers, waving a thick binder above her head like some sort of regulatory battle flag. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," Karen panted, arriving at the scene with the theatrical flair of someone announcing the end of civilization. "This man is conducting human authorized excavation without proper permits." Officer Martinez looked at the half-filled pool, then at Tom, who was offering the work crew bottles of water. "Sir, do you have the proper city permits for this work?" Tom nodded, producing a manila folder. "Building permit, demolition permit, and utility clearances. All approved last month." Karen's face cycled through several shades of red. "But what about HOA approval?" That's when Officer Thompson started chuckling. One evening, as she passed the garden, Tom's 6-year-old granddaughter called out to her, "Mrs. Karen, come see our butterfly house." Karen approached the fence, where the little girl proudly showed off a painted wooden structure hanging from a tree branch. "It's beautiful, Emma," Karen said genuinely. "Does it attract lots of butterflies?" "Tons. And look," Emma pointed to Beverly Henderson's wind chime, visible over the back fence. "The music helps them find it." Karen smiled, listening to the gentle melody that had once represented everything wrong with her neighborhood but now sounded exactly right. "You know what, Emma? I think you might be onto something there." As she walked home, Karen's phone buzzed with an email from the Willowbrook Estates Facebook group. Someone had posted a photo of Tom's garden with the caption, "Sometimes the best community improvements happen naturally when people just care about each other." The post had dozens of likes and comments about how the space had brought the neighborhood together. Karen added her own comment. "Beautiful example of what's possible when we focus on people instead of rules." She hit send, then put her phone away and continued her walk through a neighborhood that finally felt like home again, imperfect, unregulated, and wonderfully human. But as she approached her house, she noticed something that made her pause: fresh tire tracks in her perfectly maintained lawn, leading right up to her prized rose bushes. Karen felt the familiar surge of indignation rising in her chest, then caught herself and laughed out loud. Some things, apparently, never changed, but her reaction to them had evolved considerably. She made a mental note to mention the tire tracks to Tom at the next meeting, not as a violation or complaint, but as a neighbor asking another neighbor to help solve a small shared problem. After all, that's what communities were really about. Karen spent the weekend conducting what she privately called reconnaissance missions, armed with her phone camera, measuring tape, and a laminated copy of the HOA covenants. She prowled the neighborhood like a regulatory bloodhound. If her neighbors wanted to mock her authority, she'd show them exactly what that authority could accomplish. By Monday morning, she compiled a list of violations that would make any HOA president proud. Mailboxes that were 2.3 inches too tall, garbage cans visible from the street after collection day, unauthorized garden gnomes, and fence stain that was technically forest brown instead of the approved woodland brown. Her first target was the Hendersons at 1247 Maple Street. Their crime: a decorative wind chime that exceeded the Covenant's pleasant auditory accessory size limit by 6 inches. "Mrs. Henderson," Karen announced, marching up the front walkway with her violation notice, printed on official HOA letterhead. "I'm here to discuss your non-compliant wind decoration." Beverly Henderson, a 72-year-old retired teacher, opened her front door with a confused smile. "I'm sorry, what?" "Your wind chime violates Section 7.42 of our community covenants. I'm issuing a formal violation notice with a 10-day compliance deadline." Karen thrust the paper forward like she was serving a legal summons. "Karen, honey, my granddaughter made this for me in art class. It's 3 pieces of driftwood and some shells. The specifications clearly state that wind-activated decorations cannot exceed 18 inches in total length. Yours measures 24.5 inches. Beverly stared at Karen as if she'd announced plans to demolish the local library. "You measured my wind chime. Compliance monitoring is part of my presidential duties. Failure to remove this violation within 10 days will result in a $50 fine, increasing by $25 each additional week of non-compliance." The conversation was interrupted by Tom Jenkins walking his dog past the Hendersons' house. He caught sight of Karen holding her measuring tape and burst out laughing. "Let me guess," he called out. "Wind chime violation. What's next, Karen? Grass blade height inspections?" "Actually," Karen snapped, "Section 3.08 requires lawn maintenance to community standards. Your grass is currently 3.2 inches tall. Maximum allowable height is 3 inches." Tom's dog chose that moment to lift his leg on Karen's pristine white Honda Civic. "CHASTA? No." Tom lunged for the leash, but it was too late. A steady stream hit Karen's rear tire and hubcap. Karen's shriek could probably be heard 3 blocks away. "Your dog just vandalized my vehicle. This is destruction of property." "I'm sorry, Karen. I'll pay for a car wash." "A car wash? A CR wash? This is a biohazard situation. I'm calling animal control." Beverly Henderson watched this exchange with growing horror. "Karen, it's just a little." "Mrs. Henderson, remove the wind chime or face escalating fines." "Mr. Jenkins, your dog will be reported for aggressive territorial marking, and your grass needs immediate attention." Karen spun toward her car, then spun back. "And I'm documenting this entire incident for the HOA violation database." As Karen drove away, Beverly and Tom stood in stunned silence. "She measured my wind chime," Beverly whispered. "She's completely lost it." Tom replied, watching his dog sniff around a fire hydrant. "This is going to get worse before it gets better." Neither of them noticed Karen circling back around the block, photographing Tom's non-compliant grass from 3 different angles.